Good afternoon, folks. Nice to see you both.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Can I have you introduce yourselves?
Absolutely. I'm Hayley Gray, and I'm one of the co-writers and co-directors of Unarchived.
And my name is Elad Tzadok. I'm the other co-director and co-writer.
Nice. Thanks for doing this with me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're happy to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I watched your film yesterday, and I was quite blown away by um, the history or the unhistory of all of these people that
Yeah.
have gone undocumented, unarchived, as
Yeah.
you put it,
Yeah.
and it's really quite tragic because there's I wasn't sure if it was just going to focus on one group, but you had 6 chapters, didn't you, or 5 chapters?
We had 5
We have
chapters?
5 chapters, yeah,
Four
that kind of speak to
groups.
different groups, and obviously there's so many more that we weren't able to include.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it'd be like a 4-hour epic, right?
Yeah.
Be a TV show.
Yeah. Hey, you never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could make it into a series.
Absolutely, we could.
Mm-hmm.
How much footage ended up on the cutting room floor? Like, I'm sure you have a lot more footage that.
That's a great question. Yeah, we
I
do
checked at
have.
some point.
I would say there's like 3 or 4 big scenes that we had to let go of,
Mm.
which was tough. But for the most part, we had really thoughtful, incredibly articulate interview subjects.
Yeah.
So they got to the point pretty fast, which was nice.
Mm-hmm. I think we had around 50 hours. I might be wrong.
Yeah, that sounds right. 50 hours into 90-minute checks to me.
Seems like
Wow.
the ratio.
So then you got to go through all that footage and go, oh, we need to put this in. That one we can maybe save if we're needing some more time. We can throw that
Yeah.
in, sort of thing.
Well, you know
How
what?
do you make the
Yeah.
choice?
It was tricky. It was challenging. I think there were a lot of moments that we were talking, a lot of times that we were trying to figure out, okay, we know what each of these individual stories are, but there's a meta conversation that we're trying to have with everything. And how do we weave the plot or how do we weave the content in a way that really highlights the points that are the most important to get across to an audience?
Yeah, we started with paper edits. So we did a lot of writing it down from the transcripts and then trying to see how that fit together. And then from there, kind of cutting away.
Hmm.
Because like you say, I like how it, um, like at the very start, I like how you have the paper that pulls back.
Yeah, we were really lucky to work with an amazing graphics artist because we knew we wanted the textures of like paper and video footage and like 16 mil
Hmm.
to be part of the film. So we worked with Sterling LaRose, who's a phenomenal director in his own right and graphic designer, who helped us kind of build out those sequences of
A
rips
lot of
and
those,
tears and
yeah, stop
scribbles.
motion sequences that are kind of half digital, half analog, where he'd print sequences out and then physically rip them and take one photo at a time, and then bring that back into the computer and morph that into the art that it is.
Absolutely.
So when you're dealing with fiction, it's easy because you can just comes out of your head, you write it down, and then you know. But you're dealing with nonfiction. You're dealing with real people. You're dealing with real events that are not, with the exception of the few people that have kept these documents. The hardest part for me was that when they go to the archives and they find that book from the 1800s, and people are they're only noticed by their number. That's it. There's no
Yeah.
history. There's no, maybe that was somebody's great great grandfather, but they won't know.
It's horrendous how many uh, indigenous and people of color communities aren't named in our archives on so many levels except for by their race.
If you look at a lot of these archives and start flipping through the photos and the collections and everything, beyond the fact that for the most part, they're probably donated by a white family or a white institution or something like that. The only people that really tend to get named are the single white politician male that happens to be
in the photo
in the
of 50
photo.
Indigenous people.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty horrendous.
And that seems to be a consistent thing that is slowly trying to get to be rectified, but it's a long, arduous process.
And it's really hard if you don't have people's names to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for sure. So what was the inspiration? Who had the light go on and say this is something that needs to be told. This is something that people need to know.
Yeah.
How did that all come about?
Well, I was volunteering for a nonprofit called Populous Map that works to digitize and literally unarchive and archive underknown histories in BC. And the first big aha we had was going to Cumberland and seeing the Hayashi photography studio photos, which showed how diverse Cumberland and Vancouver Island was. That was a huge aha for me. I hadn't seen racialized communities from that period documented in that way before. And it really made me realize Cumberland's just one town in BC. There's so many places where there were huge racialized communities that went undocumented. So we made a short film called Hayashi, a short documentary called Hayashi Studio about that photography studio. And that's kind of how the ball got rolling.
Mm-hmm. And then we took that and went to the NFB and started having conversations with them about how can we turn this into the larger conversation that it is. And we started off with 20 different stories across the province, looking at all these small community and personal archives that people have and what that means across the province. And then slowly but surely over the pandemic, we kind of whittled it down to these four or five stories.
Yes.
So how quick were, because that was going to be one of my next questions was, did you make the film and then you went to the NFP, or you went to the NFP with the idea of what you wanted to do and they funded you to do the project?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we went to the NFP with the idea of creating a web series at first with all these various stories, and then went into a development phase with them where what emerged was maybe these aren't separate stories, maybe this is a feature. And that it happened right at the beginning of the pandemic, and we were supposed to shoot at 2020.
Yeah, summer 2020, and
so everything kind of screeched to a halt, and we went back to the drawing board. And I think what happened in the world and what happened as we delved deeper into the subject matter, things tend to, it started evolving. The understanding of the awareness in general in the world in North America, and then also our understanding of the subject matter evolved.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So neither one of you are slouches in the industry. You both have, I checked out your IMDb's, and you're both very what's the word? You don't get stuck in one field. You've both done a lot of everything. Elad, you're more of an editor, are you? Yeah, because you've got 26 credits as an editor.
Oh, geez, do I? Okay.
Do you want to speak to your background?
In the film industry, I mean, yeah, I'm primarily an editor, and I started a production company back in 2012 with a few other people, and we've been kind of slowly creating our own content on the side and making short content here and there. Hayley's.
Yeah, and I think having that editorial background was really helpful for us, especially as we went on to finish editing the film.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all over the place. I started as an actor and then a production coordinator and then a production manager, and I script souped, although I was never very good at it. And now I mainly write and direct full time, which is lovely. I appreciate having been in a lot of different places and a lot of different departments. I do think it helps me understand all the different facets and everything that goes into filmmaking.
And you know what? I feel like if you start scratching the surface under most people, at least in Vancouver, in the industry, you see that they start having their hands in various pies and they have to multitask. No one really does just one job.
So you get the backing from the NFB. That's got to say, hey, we got something here, that they believe in us, that they're going to fund it. But now you're going to be at VIF, which is, you know, highly regarded as one of North America's best film festivals. How does that feel as, you know, I mean, this isn't first feature for either one of you, but to get your story heard and people want to play it for you, how does that feel?
It feels great. It is our first feature as directors
Hmm.
and writers, so
Oh,
that's
okay. Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, I think we feel incredibly honored and incredibly privileged to be able to do this and to showcase the film and have the world premiere at VIF. I think it is such a fundamentally, it's a universal story, or it's an incredibly uh, BC focused story with universal implications,
Hmm.
and we're really happy that we're getting to do the world premiere here in BC and in Vancouver.
So many of our subjects, for obvious reasons, are either BC based or Vancouver based. So just having the communities that we are speaking to in the film show up is going to be so huge.
And you keep on hearing over and over again, like BC is this new province. There isn't a lot. Yeah,
When I first moved here I was in Ontario, then Nova Scotia. Everybody's like, oh, BC doesn't have a lot of history, and it was so quick for me to be like, oh, it does. It's just not like the traditional history that you hear about on the East Coast. And in my opinion, it's much more interesting.
Well, and the systemic racism that is lodged in our history here. When you
yeah,
were talking to the fellow that has the Chinese museum, you know, it wasn't just 2020
yeah.
when those racial attacks started happening. I think we've got, you know, the former president of the United States to blame for those attacks because he made it quite clear on some of his statements and put all that fear mongering in the people's heads.
And over 200 years of anti-Asian racism and legislation, right? Like one thing I am very proud of with the film is that we do both speak to how the Chinese Canadian experience has been in BC for well over 200 years and how it has resisted like state white supremacy for that entire time.
hmm
So no wonder we're finding ourselves in this place when the states condoned racism for so long that people are continuing to be racist and problematic towards the Chinese Canadian community.
Well, yeah, I mean, when that woman says there used to be houses here, there used to
Yeah.
be there used to be heritage here, there used to be a community, and it's just trees.
It's been kind of crazy to how many people didn't
Weren't
believe us
aware of that.
or
Or
weren't aware that like almost every town in BC had a Chinese community in a Chinatown, and if it's not there, it's because it was burnt down, broken down, or stolen. And that's the reality of it.
yeah, if you take into account that BC had what is it, over 300 or has currently over 300 ghost towns, so communities that used to exist that had some sort of prosperous industry and a community built around it, that are there no more. And you go far enough back, each one of those towns has a Chinatown, has a Japanese community, has a Black community,
And the South Asian
and a South
community.
Asian
Yeah.
community. And yeah, and it kind of it blows your mind once you kind of start deconstructing that and understanding what that means in terms of the diversity of this province and the history of it.
Hmm. I went many years ago to Science World and I saw this documentary on the building of the CN rail, the railway.
Mhm.
And the one thing that stuck with me more than anything else in the film was the fact that so many Chinese immigrants were working on the rail, either died of um, animal attacks, like getting killed by a bear or a wolf or whatever, or they froze to death. But they only had grave markers beside the rail. They didn't have proper burials for these people, and it's just like, here we go again. These people are not being credited. You know, they're not being um,
Their lives aren't being
respected as
valued.
individuals. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and if you start looking, and you know what, talking about archives and talking about communities, one of the things that we've learned in this process and researching the documentary even prior is that graveyards in a lot of these communities tend to be this very fascinating archive of the community that was. And when you're looking at what's what graves are being valued and what graves are not, what's registered and left there and what's not. And I mean, there's different cultural things that affect what lasts and what doesn't. Uh, but you get a very fascinating read on how society deals with all these various communities at the time. Like if you look at Penticton and Penticton's graveyard, there's the main primary one, but then also the pioneer graveyard that was the other side of the tracks.
There's a graveyard that they now know to be a Chinese Canadian graveyard that's still unmarked, which is incredibly unfortunate.
Where they found headstones a few years back. I can't remember when.
I think the thing I'm most excited about with the Chinese Canadian Museum is that they're trying this hub and spoke model where they have these centralized hubs, but they're really hoping that the museum spans all of BC because the Chinese Canadian experience really does span all of British Columbia.
And where is that museum? Is that in Victoria?
Everywhere. No, it is in Victoria. They're building. They just acquired a building in Chinatown in Vancouver.
Okay.
But Fantan Alley also has a piece of the museum, and they're in conversations to build it out into a lot of different smaller pieces and smaller communities, so that it isn't just one centralized experience, but it is something that you can experience in all sorts of different parts of British Columbia.
Well, that's good. That's a good idea. So we get to the gay and the transgender is the fellow that's doing the studies in the Victoria, who has all the archives. Back in the 20s, they found that somebody was charged for cross-dressing. You guys found that? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Aaron's an amazing professor and archivist, and a lot of, to your point exactly, the earliest documentation of the trans community in Canada and British Columbia is unfortunately through the legal system, through people being arrested for living their authentic lives in their gender and not being accepted for that.
Yeah, and
that's something that you see across. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay.
It's something that you see across the board with various communities, where their stories and their history tends to get recorded, or at least in the official records, through the legal system, through the media outlets, and with a very particular lens. So they get criminalized. They get the whole point of they get exactly, and it comes
But to your point as well, it was interesting for Aaron to kind of speak to how the transgender community the trans community would hold on to these newspaper clippings as proof that somebody else had the same experience as them, wanted to live the same life as them, and that was, even though it was a really dark thing that happened to that person, was a moment of hope that they weren't alone.
Well, and then they made comedies like Some Like It Hot, Jack Lemmon, and and they're dressing up as women. The 90s had Tu Wong Fu with Patrick Swayze and Wesley Snipes, and I don't know if that's them embracing that or kind of mocking it at the same time. Because then you have Tyler Perry, who's been doing Medea for how long? And it's not the same thing though. Sorry, it's not the same. It's not the same thing because they're doing it for entertainment value, and they're not really focusing on.
And they're making them a bit of the butt of the joke, right? Which is a huge problem with so much of the non-trans community's first interaction with the idea of transness is at the is a joke at the expense of a heteronormative society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's tricky. There's definitely a reckoning, I think, coming within the comedy world around all those pieces.
Yeah.
Well, and getting back to them being criminalized, like that fellow had the record books of the Chinese that were being vilified for just being of their race. That was their only crime was, and then people are like, well, Martin Luther King was too radical. The Black Panthers were too radical. MLK was too radical. It's like they needed, they were shouting because they weren't being heard. They weren't being respected.
And if the dominant record doesn't reflect that you weren't being heard and weren't being respected and barely existed in that framework, then no wonder you have to push those boundaries so hard.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I do appreciate what Henry says in the documentary, which is that these records that were meant to criminalize and in some ways hide racialized communities now can be used for us to prove like the Chinese community was there and did face systemic racism.
The BC Royal Museum, they've come under a lot of scrutiny. And just recently, within the last month or so, they had that piece that they've now admitted was a carving that was done by a local Victoria resident in 2017. But they were saying it was a historical archive.
Oh wow, I don't know anything about that, but it's been such a horrific past quagmire, I'm going to say, the Royal BC Museum right now. I don't actually know what other words to use. It
feels like every week and every month there's a new development in the process and in the story of what has been the Royal BC Museum and what it is to become. And
it's tough, some really wonderful people working really hard to try to make that place a better place, and reckoning with that extent of a colonial past is just I cannot imagine trying to do that level of work.
Well, no, it's not just one level. You've got so many levels within that museum that kind of have to go through with a fine tooth comb. Like that one woman who had the sticky notes and go, "We were here. Where's our history?" That was an interesting part of the film as well. Is just where are we? Why are we not here? And I like how you edited that East Indian fellow out of the. They're shaking hands at the train.
Yeah.
But then he fades away because it's like, they're not being recognized for the work that they did.
Yeah.
To help build BC, what we know today, and things were just taken for granted.
Absolutely, they were. Satwinder is an amazing human, and seeing how the South Asian community went into the Royal BC Museum and was like, you know what, we weren't here. How are you going to rectify and actually create an inclusive history? Was incredibly inspiring. I really appreciate Satwinder. I feel like it's really easy to get downtrodden with the sheer amount of work and frustration. And every time Satwinder's just like, but we've got to keep going, and finds a way to have a positive attitude about it, which I really admire.
Well, and she does come across that way. She's just like very bubbly, and she seems like somebody you could just sit and have coffee with, and
Absolutely, and she's a force of nature in terms of her enthusiasm and her commitment to making this change and to enacting it.
Yeah, and doing it in a positive way, which is so lovely. Yeah.
Yeah,
I would vote for her for prime minister. I'm just gonna put that out there.
Well, that's right. John Horgan's resigning, so.
Opening. Yeah.
Well, and getting back to the museum, is he was going to shut it down until 2030, but then people were like, hang on, there's way too much money, so now it's open again, and I guess they just got to do cleanup while it's open.
One of the last things we were trying to figure out with the film was what we were going to put on the title card at the end of the film for the Royal BC Museum, because it was closed, then it was open, then it was
kept
going
on
to
changing.
open.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like that situation is going to continue to evolve long after our screening.
Yeah. It's an ever evolving story, and I think it's an important conversation that we're having right now about it all. And I think what it's been interesting to see the province's reaction and people's reaction to everything that's been going on at the RBCM. I think there's a lot of trying to understand and maybe not necessarily understanding the necessity behind some of the decisions, some of the changes. Uh, and we hope this film, to a certain extent, helps communicate some of what's going on and why some of those changes need to happen.
Absolutely.
Well, and the young native woman who finds that undocumented videotape of her grandmother working on elk hide. It was elk hide, or was it moose?
It was moose hide, and I don't think it's actually your grandmother, but yeah.
No, the first video was her grandmother, the one at the
Oh, that
gallery.
one, yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Did she say it
Yeah,
was a?
Sandra is
Yeah, it was
sorry,
a
go ahead.
unmarked tape.
Mark tape. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you guys, you have so many tapes you probably went through just to make
Yeah,
this.
absolutely. It's crazy just the things that you find when you have the time, or sometimes when you don't have the time, that just pop up and kind of remind you how important it is to hold on to your history.
I think that's
But
one of the biggest things that we hope people take away from the movie is that their grandmother stuff is important and that all these little tapes and artifacts and photos and documents and all these things that are kind of sitting in the attic mean something to our collective history, even
yeah.
if you don't see the value in them in your day-to-day life. So hopefully after watching the film, everybody runs back and takes a look in their
Does an
attic.
interview with their grandma.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too is it's really quite a shame that they came across that footage just by fluke.
Yeah.
That it should be something that her family has in their possession.
Yeah, and has access to it. So
Exactly.
huge.
Yeah.
100%.
Hmm.
So you said there's a possibility that some of your subjects might be at some of this, either one of the screenings. Are you
Hmm.
planning on having some of them there? Or?
Yeah, we'll definitely, I can't remember which screening will have who, but there will definitely be some of our subjects at both of the screenings for
Absolutely.
sure.
Yeah.
And it's at the SF, going to be at the SFU Woodwards building.
The
Yeah.
premiere is at the SFU Woodwards building, and then our second show on Sunday is at International Village.
So September 30th is SFU Woodwards at 6:15, and October 2nd is at International Village at 12 noon.
Are you both going to be showing up to both events?
Absolutely.
We are, yeah, we'll both be there for the Q&A. If you guys have any other questions, you can ask us them there.
Oh, okay. I'll be sure to share this. And yeah, that was the other one was when you did the Grunt Gallery. My sister actually had an exhibit of her paintings there, so
Oh,
I'm like,
nice.
I recognize that. I'm like, Grunt Gallery. Noel had
I
some of her
bet the
paintings.
exhibit's archived because they've done such a great job of archiving their decades of art and performance work. It's phenomenal what they've done with that space.
Yeah.
Because he found that tape or video of that elder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was such a happenstance. Like it really does make you realize that Sandra is like somebody's looking out for her on the other side because Dan found that at a completely different archive art space in Toronto and happened to bring it there and happened to mention it to someone, and then it happened to end up in Sandra's hands, and it feels like there's
Serendipity.
there's a little bit too much serendipity happening in there. Sandra's got
Not too much. Just
there's
the right
just the right amount of
amount.
serendipity. Yeah.
Well, hopefully the luck keeps running for her, and she finds more, you know,
I
like
have
I
a
said,
feeling it will.
You know what? I think it's maybe 20% luck and 80% putting that intention into the world. And I think it's just about time that the world brings it back.
Absolutely. It definitely is she is building it, and it is
Mhm.
coming. They are coming.
Well, she seems very tenaciously. She wants to get this work done for
Yeah.
her people.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is a
And
force for
it's a
sure.
shame that she's kind of having to do catch up for all this history that's been lost.
Well, I mean, a
'Cause
lot of the
it should be
communities
there.
are.
Sorry.
That's, I think, that's the biggest takeaway from the film, I think, is the notion that if you look at each and every one of these communities, that is in essence what they're doing. They're trying to make up for lost time. And society as a whole is finally getting to that place where it's willing and able to support that and promote that. So it's about
And
pushing
occasionally
that.
even fund it.
Yeah, so it's about pushing that up the hill and bringing the awareness out to everybody of the importance of this work and of the importance of what everybody's doing.
Well, I thought, as you both saw my post yesterday, I thought it was an incredible piece of work.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
As I know, a lot of people in the industry, there's always something on the back burner. What have you both got projects that you have that you are going on to next after this?
Yeah. I'm currently working on a documentary series about a Paralympian, which has been really phenomenal. I'm excited to share in 2023. And then myself and our cinematographer Kayla Watchell are working on a feature-length narrative film that's going to speak to the forest fires and her family's history.
Oh, okay.
And I have a documentary that's kind of in the early stages of development we're working on, and then I'm back to editing a handful of feature projects.
Nice.
Mhm.
Thank you, Susie.
Yeah.
Well, and I see that you went to Vancouver Film School.
I did, yeah.
Mhm.
I did my undergrad at Dalhousie and had what I call my quarter life crisis and decided I needed to make movies instead, and so booked it from the East Coast out here to VFS.
I took an editing course there,
Oh, nice.
Nice.
but it was old stock film. It wasn't
Oh,
digital.
lovely. I feel like everyone's getting back into old stock film though. We
That's the next one.
digitized a bunch of 16 mil and 35 mil from the South Asian community to
Mhm.
show to be part of the film for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we didn't even digitize it. It was all processed as stock footage.
That's crazy.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can't imagine editing back in those days. I think editing nowadays drives me nuts. I think that at that point I'd probably lose all my hair.
But it's gonna come back. It's all. I was
Yeah.
looking today on Craigslist, like, oh, there's a reel-to-reel editing for 8 and 16 mil. How much is? Okay, I can
Oh,
buy that.
Well,
Where?
every trend comes back, right? Like
Yeah.
the '80s, the
very true.
'70s, everything
Yep.
comes back. So it's like, hey, why don't we go back to stock film?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
100%.
Well, I can't thank you both enough for spending your bit of your afternoon with me and discussing the film because, like I said, I think it's a great little film.
Thank you.
I
I
think it
appreciate
touches on a
that.
subject that I hope a lot of people will watch because I'm sure once it's done its festival run, it's probably going to show up on the NFB platform.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be accessible to everybody.
Hmm.
Well, when that becomes available, I will certainly push it. I'll give it a kind of a shout out.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Have you got any other festivals planned? Is it going to be in any other? Is it going to Calgary or?
Nothing we can announce just
Yeah.
yet. No, we didn't
Oh,
send it to
okay,
Calgary.
okay,
Yeah.
all right. It's a little too early for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, all the best. I wish you success with the film and great job,
Thank you.
both of you and everybody else who worked on the film.
Thank you so much. We
Thank
really
you very
appreciate
much.
it.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good weekend. And
You
maybe I'll see
too.
you at one of the showings.
Yeah.
Yeah, please
Hopefully.
come. We'd love to see you.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Great.
Have a good one.
Cheers.
Thanks so much.
Bye.